The giant space station floated in the dark between three bright stars, and everyone in the galaxy knew what it was for. The Crystal Arena was the most famous fighting place in all of known space, and had been hosting the best warriors from every world for more than 200 years. Ships came from thousands of planets to watch the fights and place their bets on who would win and who would die. Jake Murphy walked through the metal halls of the station and felt very small. The human was tall for his kind, but still looked like a child next to most of the other fighters. Huge lizard people walked past him with skin like armor and claws that could cut through steel. Bird creatures with wings made of sharp metal talked in voices that sounded like screaming. Even the smaller aliens looked dangerous with their glowing eyes and teeth like knives. The Earth Defense Corps had sent Jake here because someone had to come. When the Galactic Council invited humans to send a fighter, it was supposed to be an honor, but everyone knew it was really just for fun. The aliens wanted to see how fast a human would lose to a real warrior. The betting computers were giving Jake odds of 500 to 1 against winning even his first fight. Jake stopped at a big window that looked out into space and watched the ships arriving. Each one carried fighters from different worlds, and each fighter was the best their planet had to offer. Some were twice as tall as Jake, with 4 arms and muscles like steel cables. Others moved so fast they were just blurs of color when they walked. A few looked normal until they opened their mouths and breathed fire or shot lightning from their hands. Ambassador Lisa Carter found Jake at the window and stood next to him without saying anything for a while. She was in charge of making sure Earth looked good to the other worlds, but they both knew this was probably going to be embarrassing. The human race was new to space and new to the council, and everyone was watching to see what they could do. Lisa finally spoke, and her voice was quiet. She told Jake that nobody expected him to win, but they did expect him to show that humans were brave. She said that sometimes being brave was more important than being strong, and that the other races needed to see what humans were made of even if they did not understand it yet. Jake nodded and kept looking out at the stars. He had trained his whole life for fighting, but never against anything like what was waiting for him in the arena. Earth fighters were used to fighting other humans who were all basically the same size and strength and speed. Here he would face creatures that evolution had turned into living weapons over millions of years. The current champion was a Kryllian named Vexstar, and he had never lost a fight in 12 years. The lizard warrior was 8 feet tall with green scales that could stop bullets and claws that could slice through tank armor. His reflexes were so fast that most opponents died before they even saw him move. The arena doctors kept a special medical team just for fighters who faced Vexstar, because there was usually very little left to save. Jake had watched videos of Vexstar fighting, and the alien moved like liquid death. Every attack was perfect, and every defense was unbreakable. The Kryllian would study his opponents before each fight and then destroy them using their own weaknesses against them. He never used more force than needed and never wasted a single movement. Fighting Vexstar was like fighting a machine built only for killing. The arena itself was a huge round room that could change into any kind of fighting space. Sometimes it was filled with water for the fish people to fight in. Other times it became a maze of rocks and fire for creatures that liked to hunt. For Jake's fight, it would be set to standard conditions, which meant normal gravity and air that humans could breathe. This was supposed to be fair, but Jake knew that fair meant different things to different species. Other humans had come to watch, and Jake could see them in the viewing areas looking nervous. Captain Steve Blake from the Space Navy was there along with Dr. Amy Foster, who studied alien cultures. They all wanted Jake to do well, but none of them really believed he could beat a warrior like Vexstar in single combat. The arena announcer began calling fighters to prepare for the evening matches, and Jake heard his name mixed in with the others. In 1 hour he would walk into that round room and face the deadliest fighter in the galaxy, while thousands of aliens watched and waited for him to die quickly. Most humans would be terrified, but Jake felt something else. He felt curious about what would happen when a creature built for war met a creature built for survival. The preparation room was cold and quiet, and Jake could hear his heart beating while he checked his equipment one more time. The other species brought weapons that looked like they came from science fiction movies, but Jake carried only simple things that any human soldier would recognize. He had a knife on his belt and a pistol that shot metal bullets instead of energy beams. The aliens thought this made him primitive, but Jake knew that simple things usually worked better than complicated. Once Vexstar was getting ready in another room, and Jake could hear the crowd chanting the champion's name through the thick walls. The Kryllian had fans from all over the galaxy who came just to watch him fight. Some had been following his career for years and could describe every one of his victories in perfect detail. They brought banners and signs with his picture and sang songs about his greatest battles. Jake tried to remember everything he had learned about fighting, but most of his training seemed useless now. Human combat instructors taught soldiers how to fight other humans who moved and thought in predictable ways. They did not teach anyone how to fight a 8-foot-tall lizard with claws and armor skin who had never lost a battle in his entire life. The door to the arena opened and Jake walked out into a wall of sound that hit him. Like a physical force, 50,000 aliens were screaming and cheering from seats that went up so high they disappeared into darkness. The noise was so loud that Jake could feel it in his chest, and the lights were so bright that everything looked white for a few seconds until his eyes adjusted to the glare. The arena floor was a perfect circle of smooth, gray metal about 100 feet across, with walls that went straight up for 30 feet before the first row of seats began. There was nowhere to hide and nowhere to run, and the entire galaxy was watching through cameras that broadcast the fights to every civilized world. Jake had never felt so alone in his entire life. Vexter entered from the opposite side, and the crowd noise doubled in volume when they saw their champion. The Krillian moved like water flowing over rocks with every step perfectly balanced and controlled. His green scales caught the arena lights and threw them back in patterns that hurt to look at directly. When he opened his mouth, Jake could see rows of teeth that were sharp as razors, and when he flexed his hands, the claws extended like knives. The two fighters walked to the center of the arena and stopped 10 feet apart while the referee explained the rules in a voice that somehow carried over the screaming crowd. The rules were simple because they had been written for creatures from hundreds of different worlds. No weapons except what you brought with you. No outside help from anyone. Fight until one fighter could not continue or chose to surrender. Death was allowed but not required. Jake looked up at Vexstar and realized that the alien was even bigger up close than he had appeared in the videos. The champion's head was like a snake's, but with intelligence burning in yellow eyes that missed nothing. His breathing was slow and steady, like someone taking a peaceful walk instead of preparing for mortal combat. Everything about the Krillian screamed danger to every survival instinct Jake possessed. The referee stepped back and raised his hand to signal the start of the match. The arena fell completely silent for the first time since Jake had entered, and he could hear his own breathing echoing off the walls. Somewhere in the crowd he knew Lisa Carter was watching and probably praying to whatever gods she believed in. Captain Blake would be taking notes for his report back to Earth about how their representative had died bravely, if not successfully. Vexter settled into a fighting stance that Jake recognized from the videos. The Krillian's signature opening move was always the same, and it had ended more fights in the first 10 seconds than any other technique in arena history. He would charge forward with impossible speed and deliver a claw strike that would either kill his opponent instantly, or leave them too injured to continue fighting. The referee's hand dropped and the match began. Vexter exploded forward like he had been shot from a cannon, and his claws extended to their full length as he aimed for Jake's throat. The crowd held its breath because they all knew this move, and they all knew it never failed. In 3 seconds the fight would be over and the human would be dead, and everyone could go home having seen exactly what they expected to see. But when the claws arrived, Jake was not there anymore. The human had moved to the side with a speed that surprised even the enhanced cameras tracking every moment of the fight. Not just fast but smart, because he had somehow known exactly where Vexter would attack, and exactly when to move to avoid it. The champion's claws cut through empty air, and his momentum carried him past where Jake had been standing. For the first time in 12 years, Vexter had missed his opening attack, and the arena fell into shocked silence as both fighters turned to face each other again. The silence in the arena was so complete that Jake could hear Vexter breathing 20 feet away. 50,000 aliens stared down at the fighting floor where something impossible had just happened. The greatest champion in galactic history had missed his signature attack against a primitive human who should have been dead in the first 3 seconds of the match. Vexstar turned around slowly, and his yellow eyes were wide with something that might have been surprise. In 12 years of championship fighting, no opponent had ever avoided his opening strike. Most did not even see it coming before they died. The few who had managed to block it were still badly injured by the incredible force behind his claws. But the human had simply stepped aside, like he was avoiding a slow punch from a child. Jake stood perfectly still and watched the champion try to understand what had just happened. The Krillian's head tilted to one side in a gesture that looked almost curious. Vexter began to circle around Jake with careful steps, and his claws stayed extended while he looked for another opening to attack. This was not how his fights usually went, and Jake could see confusion in the aliens' movements. The crowd started making noise again, but it was different from before. Instead of the confident cheering for their champion, they were making uncertain sounds, like they were not sure what they were watching anymore. Betting computers all over the galaxy were probably crashing as odds. Calculators tried to figure out what it meant when the impossible happened in front of billions of viewers. Vexter attacked again with a different technique this time. He feinted to the left and then spun right while his tail whipped around to catch Jake from behind. It was a move that had fooled countless opponents who thought they were safe after avoiding his claws. The tail was like a club covered in spikes and could break bones, even through armor. Jake ducked under the tail and rolled forward between Vexter's legs while the champion was still spinning. He came up behind the Krillian and could have attacked with his knife, but instead he just stepped back and waited. The crowd gasped because the human had passed up a perfect chance to strike at his opponents unprotected. Back Vexter spun around again, and this time Jake could see real confusion in the alien's eyes. Every fight Vexter had ever won followed the same pattern. He would attack with overwhelming force and speed until his opponent either died or became too injured to fight back. But Jake was not fighting the way opponents were supposed to fight. Instead of trying to match the champion's strength and speed, the human was doing something else entirely. Jake was learning. Every time Vexter attacked, Jake watched how the alien moved and remembered it for the next time. When the champion tried the same spinning tail strike again, Jake was already moving before the attack even began. He flowed around Vexter's movements like water around a rock, and the champion's claws found nothing but empty air over and over again. Commander Rex Stone watched from Earth's observation post and recognized what Jake was doing, even if no one else did. The human was not trying to beat Vexter in a test of strength or speed, because he knew he would lose that kind of fight. Instead, Jake was treating the match like a puzzle that needed to be solved. Every attack from the champion gave Jake more information about how Vexter moved and thought and fought. This was what humans did better than any other species in the galaxy. They learned and adapted and found ways to overcome problems that seemed impossible. Other races had evolved to be stronger or faster or tougher, but humans had evolved to figure out how to beat things that were stronger and faster and tougher than they were. Vexter was starting to breathe harder, and his attacks were becoming more desperate. He had never faced an opponent who could predict his moves so accurately. What the champion did not understand was that Jake was not really predicting anything. The human was analyzing everything he saw and building a mental map of how Vexter's body worked and how his mind approached combat. The turning point came when Vexter decided to use his ultimate technique. The Spiral Death Strike was a combination of speed and power and misdirection that had never been successfully defended against in the entire history of the arena. It was so complex that most opponents died before they even realized the attack had begun. Vexter launched himself into the air while spinning and extending all of his claws at once. He twisted his body in ways that seemed to defy physics while attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. The crowd rose to their feet because they all knew this move, and they all knew it was unbeatable. Even if the human survived it, he would be so badly injured that the fight would be over. Jake moved, not with panic or desperation, but with the calm precision of someone who had already solved the equation. He flowed through Vexter's attack like smoke through a screen door, and every movement was exactly what it needed to be and nothing more. The champion's ultimate technique became a trap that he had built for himself when Jake turned the alien's own momentum and positioning against him. Vexter crashed to the arena floor and lay there stunned while Jake stood over him with his knife at the champion's throat. The crowd was completely silent again because they were watching something that should have been impossible. The greatest fighter in galactic history was helpless on his back while a human decided whether he would live or die. Jake stood perfectly still with his knife touching the scales on Vexter's throat, while 50,000 aliens held their breath and waited to see what would happen next. According to the rules of the arena, the human could end the fight right now by killing the champion. Every other species would have taken the victory without hesitation because that was how the tournament worked and how warriors proved their worth to the galaxy. But Jake did something that nobody expected. He stepped back and put his knife away. The crowd erupted into confused noise as aliens tried to understand what they were seeing. In the entire history of the Crystal Arena, no fighter had ever shown mercy to a defeated opponent. It was considered the ultimate insult in most warrior cultures to spare someone you had beaten in combat. Death with honor was better than life. With shame, Jake offered his hand to help Vexter stand up, and his voice was quiet, but somehow carried across the arena despite all the noise from the crowd. He told the champion to get up because they were not finished yet. The words sent a ripple of shock through the watching aliens who could not believe what they were hearing. Vexter looked up at the human with yellow eyes that showed an emotion his species rarely displayed. Confusion mixed with something that might have been respect as the Krillian tried to understand why his opponent had spared his life. In his culture, showing mercy was worse than losing because it meant you thought your enemy was too weak to be worth killing. But something in Jake's eyes told Vexter that this was not about weakness or insult. The human was not looking down at him with pity or contempt. Instead, Jake looked like someone who had found something interesting and wanted to see what would happen next. Like a scientist studying a fascinating problem that was not quite solved yet. Vexter slowly got to his feet and brushed dust off his scales while he tried to make sense of what had just happened. His ultimate technique had failed completely, and he had been at the mercy of a creature that everyone thought was primitive and weak. But instead of ending the fight, the human wanted to continue as if nothing had happened at all. Dr. Helen Chang watched from the human observation area and nodded to herself because she had predicted this moment. Jake was not just fighting to win a tournament, he was fighting to show the galaxy something about what humans were really like. Other species saw combat as a way to prove dominance and establish hierarchy. Humans saw it as a way to test limits and discover what was possible. The referee looked confused because this had never happened before in arena history. The rules said the fight should continue until one opponent could not go on, but they did not say what to do when the winner decided not to win. After a moment of hesitation, he signaled for the match to resume, and the crowd settled back to watch something completely unprecedented. The second round began, but it was a totally different kind of fight. Vexter now knew that his traditional techniques would not work against this opponent, so he started trying new approaches. Instead of relying on the moves that had made him champion, he began experimenting with different attacks and combinations that forced Jake to solve new problems. In real time, what the audience witnessed was unlike anything they had ever seen in the arena. Both fighters were changing and growing stronger during the battle itself. Jake's defensive movements became more fluid as he learned to read Vextar's new techniques. The champion's attacks became more creative as he adapted to fighting an opponent who could predict his standard moves. It was no longer about one species trying to dominate another through natural advantages. The fight had become a conversation between two warriors who were pushing each other to reach new levels of skill and understanding. Every exchange taught them something new about combat and about themselves. General Pete Harris watched from Earth's military command center and realized what he was seeing. This was not just entertainment anymore. Jake was demonstrating the fundamental difference between humans and every other species in the galaxy. While aliens had evolved to be naturally superior in specific ways, humans had evolved to become whatever they needed to become in order to survive. The crowd was completely absorbed in the match now because they could see that both fighters were better than they had been when the fight started. Vexter was discovering new ways to use his strength and speed that he had never considered before. Jake was developing defensive techniques that no human had ever used because no human had ever needed to fight a Krillian champion. That as the battle continued, something remarkable happened in the arena. Vextar began to smile, and his yellow eyes lit up with an emotion that his species almost never showed. He was having fun. For the first time in years, the champion was being challenged in a way that forced him to grow instead of just repeating the same techniques that had always worked before. Jake could see the change in his opponent and felt something similar happening to himself. Fighting Vexter was like solving the most complex puzzle he had ever encountered, and every solution led to an even more interesting problem. The human found himself enjoying the challenge in a way that surprised him. Both fighters circled each other in the center of the arena, and everyone watching could see that they were no longer the same warriors who had started the match. They had been transformed by the experience of pushing each other beyond what either had thought possible. The match had been going for almost an hour, and both fighters were breathing hard, but neither showed any sign of wanting to stop. Jake's uniform was torn and dirty from rolling across the arena floor while avoiding Vextar's attacks. The champion's green scales were scuffed, and his yellow eyes were bright with concentration as he tried techniques that he was inventing during the fight itself. The crowd had gone through every emotion possible while watching the battle, had started with confident expectation that their champion would win quickly. Then came shock when the human avoided the opening attack. Confusion followed when Jake spared Vextar's life. Now they were witnessing something that no one had words for, because nothing like it had ever happened before in galactic history. Ambassador Lisa Carter had stopped worrying about how Earth would look to the other worlds. What Jake was doing went far beyond diplomatic concerns or political image. He was showing the entire galaxy that cooperation could create something greater than competition. The fight had become a demonstration of what was possible when different species pushed each other to grow instead of simply trying to dominate other. Alien ambassadors had moved closer to the arena floor to get a better view of what was happening. The dismissive comments and casual bets had stopped completely. Everyone could see that they were watching history being made as two warriors discovered new forms of excellence that neither could have reached alone. Vexter launched another attack, but this one was completely different from anything in his traditional fighting style. He had learned to combine his natural speed with the kind of tactical thinking that he had seen Jake use. The result was a technique that was both Krillian and something entirely new at the same time. Jake flowed around the attack, but he had to work harder than before because Vextar was no longer fighting like a typical member of his species. The champion was adapting and learning just like humans did, and the combination of alien natural abilities with human problem-solving approaches was creating something that neither species had ever seen before. The human responded with a counter-attack that borrowed elements from Krillian movement patterns, but applied them in ways that only human flexibility and adaptability made possible. He was not trying to become a Krillian, but he was learning to fight like someone who understood how Krillians moved and thought and could use that knowledge creatively. Captain Steve Blake realized that he was watching the birth of an entirely new kind of combat discipline. Traditional fighting styles were based on the assumption that each species would use their natural advantages against opponents who were fundamentally different. But Jake and Vextar were creating hybrid techniques that combined the best elements from both their evolutionary backgrounds. The implications went far beyond the arena. If humans could learn to blend their adaptability with alien natural abilities, then cooperation between species could produce results that were better than anything either could achieve alone. Jake was not just winning or losing a fight. He was proving that the galaxy's future lay in synthesis rather than dominance. Dr. Amy Foster watched from the scientific observation area and took notes on everything she was seeing. The physiological changes in both fighters were remarkable as they adapted to new demands in real time. Jake's reflexes were becoming faster as he learned to anticipate Krillian movement patterns. Vextar's attacks were becoming more precise as he incorporated human tactical approaches into his natural fighting style. The arena had become a laboratory where evolution was happening at an accelerated pace. Both warriors were being forced to transcend the limitations of their species and discover capabilities that they had never known they possessed. It was like watching million-year evolutionary processes compressed into a single afternoon. That as the fight continued, the line between human and Krillian techniques began to blur. Jake moved with fluid grace that resembled Vextar's natural style, but retained the analytical precision that was uniquely human. The champion fought with strategic complexity that was learned from his opponent, but applied through strength and speed that no human could match. The crowd had become completely silent as they tried to understand what they were witnessing. This was no longer entertainment or sport or even combat in any traditional sense. It was a form of communication between two minds that were teaching each other new ways to exist in the universe. Both fighters were smiling now as they circled each other in the center of the arena. They had found something that transcended winning or losing and had entered a state where the only goal was to see how far they could push each other toward perfection. Every exchange was a gift that made both of them stronger and more complete than they had been moments before. The final phase of the match was approaching, and everyone watching knew that whatever happened next would change everything they thought. They knew about combat and cooperation and what it meant to be the best possible version of yourself. The final exchange came not with the explosive violence that had marked earlier moments in the match, but with a sense of perfect understanding between two warriors who had discovered something greater than either had imagined possible. Jake and Vextar moved toward each other slowly and deliberately, like dancers who knew every step of a routine. They had practiced for years. Both fighters executed their final techniques simultaneously. Jake used a move that combined human precision with Krillian fluid motion, while Vextar delivered an attack that blended his natural speed with the tactical complexity he had learned from watching the human. The result was poetry written in movement, and force that left the entire arena breathless with wonder. They stopped with weapons at each other's throats. Jake's knife touched the scales just below Vextar's jaw, while the champion's extended claw rested against the human's neck. Both were positioned perfectly for killing blows that would have ended the fight in mutual destruction. For a long moment, they stood frozen in that position while 50,000 aliens held their breath and waited to see what would happen. Then something beautiful occurred that no one had expected. Both fighters smiled at exactly the same time and stepped back from each other without being told to do so. They had reached a point where winning and losing had become meaningless concepts, because they had both achieved something far more valuable than victory. The crowd erupted, but not with the bloodthirsty roar that usually marked the end of arena matches. This was something different and deeper, as beings from hundreds of worlds recognized that they had witnessed a moment of transcendence that would be talked about for generations. The sound was like celebration and reverence mixed together into something entirely new. The referee looked confused because nothing in the rulebook covered this situation. After consulting with arena officials through his communication device, he finally declared the match a draw. It was the first time in the tournament's 200-year history that a fight had ended without a clear winner or loser. Ambassador Carter made her way down to the arena floor where Jake and Vexstar stood side by side, looking like old friends instead of opponents who had just been trying to kill each other. The other species representatives approached as well, and their earlier dismissiveness had been replaced by genuine curiosity and respect that bordered on awe. A delegate from the ethereal collective asked the question that everyone was thinking. She wanted to know how a human had been able to match abilities with a Krillian champion who had never lost a fight in 12 years of competition. Her voice carried wonder instead of the condescension that had marked earlier conversations about human capabilities. Jake looked around at the assembled representatives of species that had dominated the galaxy for centuries before humans had even discovered fire. His answer was simple and direct in the way that only humans seemed to manage. He explained that his people had not evolved to be the strongest or fastest or most naturally dangerous creatures in the universe. Instead, humans had evolved to figure out how to survive against things that were stronger and faster and more dangerous than they were. And then they had learned to help each other do it better than any individual could manage alone. That was the real human advantage, and it was something that could benefit every species if they were willing to learn from each other. Captain Betty Price stepped forward with a proposal that would change the tournament forever. Instead of single combat between champions representing different species, what if they created team events where mixed groups could combine their natural advantages with human adaptability and tactical thinking? The possibilities were endless and exciting. Vexter extended a clawed hand to Jake, and the human grasped it firmly while cameras broadcast the image to billions of viewers across the galaxy. The champion's voice carried a respect that surprised everyone who knew his species. He said that they had called it a fair fight, and they had been right about that much, but they had not understood what fair really meant when humans were involved. Fair did not mean equal advantages or identical capabilities. Fair meant equal opportunity to prove what you were capable of becoming when you refused to accept the limitations that others assumed were permanent. Jake smiled and agreed that fairness was about potential rather than starting conditions. He said that when humans moved, everyone else learned to move better too, because that was what humans were really good at, not being the best but helping others discover how much better they could be than they had ever imagined possible. As they left the arena together, the human had accomplished something more important than avoiding defeat. He had changed the entire galaxy's understanding of what it meant to fight and compete and grow. The other species had called it a fair fight until the human moved, and now they understood that movement was just the beginning. 6 months later, the Galactic Combat Federation had restructured completely around the principles that Jake and Vexstar had demonstrated. Mixed species teams trained together and competed in events that pushed every participant to transcend their natural limitations through cooperation and mutual learning. Jake became the Federation's first human combat instructor, teaching warriors from across the galaxy the art of adaptive thinking. His first student was Vexstar, who discovered that combining Krillian abilities with human approaches made him not just a better fighter, but a better being in every way that mattered. The betting pools still existed, but the odds had changed forever. Instead of wagering on which species would dominate, spectators now bet on which teams would discover new forms of excellence that no one had seen before. And humans were always involved because they had proven that when they moved, the entire universe learned to dance.